Um, and there was a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. One of them being something that I actually wrote notes on. I'll have to see. I think I've only written down like 2 trains of thought in my notes so far. Started taking notes here. I actually wrote down, started dating them as well, like writing the date. I remember on stream I talked about the similarities between like Adam Smith and Vladimir Lenin, but I also wrote some stuff about SimCity. I want to talk about that just because I feel like it. Um, stimulating my brain. I also have I have some candies that I'm gonna be munching on. There's not very many left, so um, yeah, there we go. You can sort of hear that. I'll just put that there. I will mute my microphone anytime I have some. You will not hear me fucking chewing on stream if I can help it. But yeah, I guess the itinerary is just some things I was thinking about, the content react, and then like relevant discussion topics, news items, whatever like comes up, whatever people in chat feel like it might be interesting to talk about, whatever I feel like it might be interesting to talk about. So let's get it started. And of course, I'm introducing this. I'm introducing this almost like it's a fucking uh either like somewhere between a therapy session and a college lecture, which I guess the college lecture bit is kind of relevant for the kind of person, for the kind of woman I aspire to be. Very well educated, capable of lecturing, and in some sense, like I guess respected for my intellectual capabilities, right? Like, love learning. I'll try not to be, you know, bouncing off the wall by the end of this. No, let me get to the first thing that I wanted to talk about. It's a little bit lower effort than React content, uh, which is really funny because React content is still not that high effort. Um, I wrote some notes about SimCity. I've been playing a lot of SimCity. You've probably seen in the Discord if you're in the Discord, but if not, uh, I've been playing SimCity. I've been working on the region of Teller, Alaska, which is a 1-to-1 scale recreation of the real life place of Teller, Alaska, town in Alaska. Um, and I have thus far I've got up to 2.2 million inhabitants in the metropolitan area. In fact, that image that I posted is even now out of date because there are 2 smaller tiles to the left of the city in the south that I have developed, and I intend to actually continue with that today. I very much enjoy the Sim City. Usually, though, I like to have something to listen to while I'm doing it. I like to feel like I'm kind of vibing while listening to somebody talk about, I don't know, fucking Leon Kennedy in Resident Evil, because that man is pure sex appeal. Um, and I have some thoughts on SimCity 4 as a game, as a city builder, and in juxtaposition to its contemporaries. And I use the term contemporaries in air quotes there because it's kind of like a pretty loose application of that, particularly, comparing SimCity to, SimCity 2013 and City Skylines. City Skylines being the big one, its other counterparts. So, I'm just gonna kind of recap this. It has its flaws. SimCity 4 actually has very unique strengths and weaknesses. Every city builder game has flaws because it's literally impossible to make a video game that is a faithful representation of building a city as much as it can be, right? Because such a game would not be fun. They would merely put you in real life where you have to engage with local politics in a city. There are some compromises that the game makes on realism that I believe are very understandable from the perspective of making a game that is fun to play. But there are some compromises that are not that. There are some compromises made across various city builders that are made from the perspective of ideology, people believing that a city should be this way, finding a way that you initially assumed you would make a city, figuring that that doesn't work, and instead of trying to find another streamlined approach that works, you alter the entire bedrock of the game around that one perspective. But I'll get to that when I get to that. Actually, no. The next thing is sort of me getting to that. The one issue, the first issue with SimCity 4, is parking. Again, this is something that like other games suffer from as well. City Skylines is way worse with this. I've seen some of the thumbnails of City Skylines videos. I have no fucking idea how you look at a city in City Skylines that the YouTubers post as a thumbnail and think that looks appealing. It's fucking disgusting. There's asphalt everywhere. Half of the screen is consumed by parking lots, and there's an urban freeway cutting through it all. Like, where the fuck are the people? You know, where's the city? All I see is a goddamn cloverleaf interchange, you know? So City Skylines is worse, but SimCity 4 still has its problems. That is to, on the parking front, that is to say, every building automatically comes with parking. When you zone for something and it builds up, a parking lot will always be included, or there's like there's like a invisible parking that just gets taken care of. You literally don't need to worry about parking in the game, right? And funnily enough, that's problematic for obvious reasons, right? Parking is a real consideration in urban planning, especially because cars take up an inordinate amount of space relative to the people that use them. But I think if I had to pick between one of the two, where there's a game that actually forces you to reckon directly with building a giant parking lot, and a game where they just provide parking invisibly in all these buildings, I would pick the model that SimCity does, that providing parking invisibly, because it leads to the city being much less sprawly. In fact, it incentivizes you to not build a very sprawling city. There are ways in which it does, there are ways in which it doesn't, but funnily enough, this one, like, the critique of parking in SimCity that I have actually sometimes comes out to a bit of a wash, because it does ultimately make the game more playable, and it doesn't incentivize car infrastructure as hard as you might think. Yeah, it is in City Skylines especially, and a little bit in SimCity 2013, though SimCity 2013 is a little bit closer to SimCity 4 in this respect. It is kind of like anti-walking propaganda. It's just pro-car, anti-social, anti-walking propaganda. You know, cars are the future. Live in the pod. Use the pod to go anywhere. Be completely alienated from any broader sense of community or place or history, novelty, that sort of thing. Right? Germane to that, like on the same subject, I actually want to talk also about highways. Yes, gas prices. This figures into my critique of highways and roads, which I guess I can get to right after highways. This is something that like SimCity 4 does really well, surprisingly. It's kind of crazy, but in SimCity 4, you never once have to build a highway. You never once have to lay down a singular tile of highway. In fact, your city will be more functional and less polluted if you don't build highways ever. This region, let me show it really quick on here. Let me open media link. Let me show my monitor. Wait, crap. OBS, please. There we go. You see this region right here? This region was made entirely without the use of highways. 2.2 million people in this metropolitan area, no highways. Not of the vanilla SimCity kind. I have a mod, I have several mods enabled in this, but one of the mods I have is the network add-on mod, one of the essentials for any like modern SimCity playthrough, which enables you to build something called real highway, where essentially you have much more direct control over the size and scope of the highway that you're building. You can drag it just like a road. And so what I do sometimes, you see how there's these smaller tiles next to these much bigger tiles. Sometimes what I'll do is for one and only one of the connections from a larger city to a much smaller city or a rural area, I'll have a quote unquote real highway, which is basically looks the same as an in-game road, but is like higher capacity. It's one lane on either side. It's the lowest capacity highway. And I just drag that for a little bit until you reach the next city. It's strictly between one city and another. And I've looked at like the traffic simulation in this game. That seems to be the appropriate way to use highways if you use them at all. But in large part, that's also just a decorative thing. I kind of wanted to aestheticize it as though it was a real urban area connected by rural infrastructure to rural areas. And for the other cities, it is not connected to the other cities by highways. It's connected by an avenue and rail connections and subway connections for the most part, and ferry connections. There's a transit map mode. You'd be able to see there's like a little ferry network. All that to say that like that's actually really nice. It's, you know, surprisingly, that's something that SimCity 4 does very correctly. You never once have to build a highway in order to have a functioning city, right? But there is a flaw that segues into another strength, which is that the game does force you to build roads. You literally cannot make a city in SimCity 4 if you don't use primarily car infrastructure. That is streets, roads, avenues. I only ever go to as large as avenues or maybe those one ways, but I always try to make sure that I'm using them sparingly, that I'm following certain rules of like road hierarchy, where it's like you don't use that many and there's just like one, and for all the rest it's just like, you know, smaller roads and streets. How to rage beta 60s urban designer, 0 highways. That's fucking facts. Believe you me. All the fucking military industrial complex nerds back in the day who loved building those giant fuck ass asphalt clover leafs would be losing their minds. Yeah, in SimCity 4, you literally get a hard-coded uh-oh, don't do that alert if you build things that aren't connected to roads. Like there's a little car with a red circle and a line through it. You have to have things at least connected to a street, right? And that's problematic because that's not how cities actually fucking work. You can have buildings that are just completely only connected to yeah, this is one of the things that does fall purely on the propaganda side of things, where it's like the first and foremost assumption is that cities are for cars. You know, in real life, you can have houses, buildings, commercial, like businesses, whatever, that are not really connected to this larger road network. And furthermore, you can have traffic management of foot, car, and transit traffic that does not use roads very extensively, you know, that primarily uses pedestrian walkways or rail networks, right? So that's unfortunate and like kind of bad, but it's actually in some part made up for by the fact that SimCity 4 hard incentivizes you to make your city walkable and build transit networks. I'm not joking when I say that in SimCity 4, if you don't have at least 2 or 3 alternative modes of transit to car, your city cannot function. If you don't have a bus network and some kind of train network, at the very least, I usually have light rail and heavy rail, you know, like passenger train and subway. I don't usually do above ground elevated rail because that stuff is extremely like, it takes up so much space and it's much harder to work with than subways. You actually, like, you can't have a working city if you try to build it all with roads, right? And I think that's actually like really cool. It's to my knowledge, SimCity 4 is the only game the only city planning game aside from Workers and Resources Soviet Republic to have a comprehensive incentive like set of incentives around building multifaceted modes of transit, you know, where like essentially in order to have a functioning city in SimCity, you have to be able to get to one, like from one side of that city to the other in a pretty reasonable amount of time without ever stepping foot in a car. You know, you could take the bus, you could take the subway, you could walk, you could do any combination of those things, but you have to be able to traverse the city on foot, you know, without a personal vehicle. And it's super cool. In this way, it also, SimCity also, despite not having mixed use zoning, the game came out in 2003, mind you. It incentivizes mixed use zoning despite not having it, right? Sims, simulated people in game, really love to live in a city where commute times are low, right? That's part of how it incentivizes you to build these large transit networks. Because if you just do cars for everything, all the roads are going to get congested to fuck. Nobody's going to be able to get anywhere. Your city's going to, you know, stagnate. So how do you do that? You do that by having transit, which makes it easy to go long distances and clears up all sorts of space for other modes of walking, transit, whatever, driving car, etc. Or you build stuff right next to each other. There is no mixed use zoning type in the game, but because of the incentivization for low commute times, you greatly benefit from building houses and commercial buildings right the fuck next to each other. Essentially, you like kind of alternate. You like, okay, here's a few blocks of residential, but it's like very close to, you're never more than like 2 or 3 blocks away from a commercial development. And the game loves that. In fact, what I've taken to doing that has quite benefited my cities is that if there's ever a larger stretch of residential areas, there's like a bigger road, and then this is like there's more predominantly like back streets and stuff like that. I will build periodically some developments of small shops so that no matter where you are in the city, you are within walking distance of zones of like commercial activity, you know, some kind of downtown or mini downtown where you can go and there's like things happening. You know, it's a really nice, like accidental, I would say, convergence of factors that make it a surprisingly like urbanist friendly game, especially for its time, 2003. Um, But there is another flaw related to this in the transit system, particularly in the money system. This is part of the way that like SimCity incentivizes you to build roads. Number one, it is the basic building block for buildings to be connected to, so you're kind of forced to do it. But in order to do that, in order to make that a viable mode of gameplay, the game actually artificially depresses the cost of roads. Roads in SimCity are probably an order of magnitude cheaper to build and maintain, especially to maintain, than roads are in real life. They are streets, roads, and avenues, I believe, are the cheapest modes of transportation, the cheapest, rather, routes of transportation in game to build and maintain. You know, streets being the absolute least expensive, than roads, than avenues, right? Where adding buses just purely represents additional cost on top of that. The game doesn't actually calculate road usage into your transit budget. You know, like there's a very unrealistic element that like fuel costs aren't a thing. Again, 2003, that's kind of hard to simulate, I'd imagine. And that like the wear and tear of cars driving over your road literally do not factor into how much it costs to maintain that road. Which again is unfortunate and is propaganda. And similarly, it also massively inflates the cost of things like rail and subway and buses too. Buses, it's actually more accurate on. Buses are not expensive to maintain, and they are also not expensive to maintain in the game. You know, good job, SimCity. Rail and subway and like light rail, whatever, rail networks are expensive to maintain in SimCity, very cheap to maintain in real life. It is, I will grant them this, it is expensive to build rail. Rail is a much more involved project than roads. Rail is much more sensitive to elevation changes. Trains are much heavier than an individual automobile. There's much more leeway for like roads to conform to the terrain. Not to say that building roads, avenues, and highways are not massively involved projects that displace a lot of the ecology and social environment that they cut through. But railways are very difficult to build. The difference is in real life, once they're built, and you do not need to spend very much to maintain them, considering how many people and freight rail can transport. For how many people per unit of rail use a rail network, it is so much cheaper than roads to maintain. To such an extent that roads have bankrupted several United States states. There are many red states in America and local communities that are on the verge of bankruptcy, financial insolvency, because of how expensive roads and highways are. They are that bad, you know? But the game wouldn't be playable if they didn't brute force it to an extent. Be surprised if the oil companies somehow got their hands into these games and they're not allowed to explain why that's the case. Nuh-uh. Oil companies don't really have much to do with this. It has more to do with, like I said, ideology. Sure, the oil companies have influenced the character of the game, but the oil companies themselves did not have their hands on this. It's because these games were made by American dev teams. We're thinking in terms of American cities and urban landscapes, right? They are influenced by the cultural power and the socioeconomic power that oil companies and the automotive industry have, But there wasn't any direct interference in the development of this game. You got to keep in mind that Maxis was actually really small at the time that this game was made. And EA, like legitimately, EA had just bought Maxis when SimCity 4 was like about to come out in 2003. They were a very small game studio. SimCity 3000, SimCity 2000, and SimCity were very niche titles for the Super Nintendo. Talking about Maxis, yes, EA did not have a hand in making SimCity 4. That was Maxis. EA simply purchased them, and there wasn't enough time for EA to do the sort of hostile takeover that they do, hollowing out these development teams and replacing them with people who are more friendly to their corporate vision of game development. This was all Maxis. This was a small game studio. It's at Maxis, Maxis. But yeah, that's like, there's a number of problems with roads, but it like, because of how much the game actually says you can't just use roads, you have to do all this other stuff. You have to make your cities walkable. It ends up being like, all right. And I would add to that as well, the streets and roads in game by default are pretty narrow. The only like really wide one is a, like an avenue. It's each tile, the game is measured in tiles, right? I'm sure you've seen like footage of SimCity, people have probably heard of it, where there's like tiles or squares. Each square represents a 16 meter by 16 meter area, I think. I could be botching that by memory, but like a road is one tile. Like each road, like the smallest something can be is one tile by one tile, 16 meters by 16 meters. That includes houses, that includes businesses, that includes roads, that includes industrial buildings and so forth, right? One piece of road will be 16 meters by 16 meters. But if you drag it out, you have like buildings on the side of it. Half of that space is actually taken up by sidewalk, right? So like you have the road, which makes the square, and then the sidewalk makes it that much smaller. So at most a road could be maybe like, I don't fucking know, 8 to 12 meters wide, maybe. It's not very wide, at least relative to most American roads. Streets and roads in SimCity are not very wide. So they don't represent as much of a dividing line between different parts, blocks, and downtowns in your city. That's why I refer to only using avenues quite sparingly, is because they do represent a much more real divide because they are 2 tiles wide instead of 1. Again, much of that is taken up by sidewalk and the divider, but even still, there's a sort of accessibility barrier that roads and streets actually don't end up being that much of a barrier to, including because like some of the other pro car propaganda, there's no such thing as traffic collisions. There's no such thing as vehicle deaths in SimCity. People can only die of sickness, pollution, or old age. Or no, actually, people can't even die of crime in SimCity. That just represents like a desirability factor. You will, like, in SimCity, the one of the more unrealistic things is that you can just walk anywhere and you are never in danger of being run over by a car. Everybody in SimCity follows the traffic laws, drivers and pedestrians alike, which is, again, extremely unrealistic. But nonetheless, it contributes to cities being walkable, which I like. That sort of touches on the money system a little bit. It's more about streets and roads. But yes, going back to my initial point was that, like, the game artificially decreases the cost of streets and roads, artificially increases the cost of rail and that sort of thing. And I think, like, unlike with City Skylines, where they actually did make roads realistically expensive and then had to manually adjust it so that roads were the cheapest form of transportation to build and maintain, I think SimCity, they just kind of started with that. They just kind of started like that because I believe SimCity 1, SimCity 2000, SimCity 3000 are much the same. I think that was like a running assumption through all of the development cycles of the various SimCity games. So it's not one of those things that's like more insidious, that they decided halfway through, we have to make this a game about building roads, you know? But another unfortunate element of the cost system, the economic and moneyed system in the game, you spend the simoleons, the sim dollars, many such cases, is taxes. The game, unfortunately, buys into the myth of capital flight. Like, citizens in your city will fucking freak out and leave and halt the entire development of a city if you increase income taxes, personal income taxes, from 8%, which is the default rate, to 8.5%, right? And that's like purely neoliberal propaganda. It's not real. There's been literature, very large wealth of literature written on the subject. Capital flight is fake. If you raise income taxes in a city, you don't get massive flight from that. People don't just uproot over a minor tax increase. It could even be a tax increase of 2 or 3 percentage points, and people would not in a million years consider up and leaving a city like fucking New York or Chicago, right? Because the game wants you to build big cities. Imagine a city the size of New York or Chicago, or even just like DC, 2 to 300,000, maybe 500,000. Like, and they're like, what? My taxes have gone from 8% to 12% on my income. That's it. I'm leaving for the fucking countryside. People don't do that. That's not a thing. And we have data to that extent. And the best part is that, for all the millionaires that talk like that say they will, all you have to do is say, no, you're not. And they'll say, yeah, I guess you're right. I'm not. It's like, it's really unrealistic. It's propaganda as fuck. And the game constantly, actually, when your city gets bigger, the game actively incentivizes you to lower taxes on businesses. Another very, very neoliberal element of the game, which makes it clear that this is more meant to be a game rather than a simulation of a city. But as you know, as much as I hate it, from a gameplay perspective, it's like fine as a gameplay element because it does incentivize you to take an interest in the money and income of your city, where it's coming from, and how to balance it, and that sort of thing, right? What the fuck? Yeah, like once your city gets beyond a certain, like the demand for certain zoning types, the demand for industrial development, the demand for uh, uh, business development, the demand for residential development are affected by taxes. It's not the only thing that affects them, but it does affect them. Um, and when your city gets large enough, the demand for whatever fucking reason, I don't know why they coded it like this, the demand for commercial for the demand for businesses actually decreases as your city grows. It's possible to meet 100% of the demand for business development in your city. And then at a certain point, the only way you can increase it is by lowering taxes or building landmarks, things that have a landmark effect that increase that number. Like on purpose propaganda, not by accident. This one is one where I'm more comfortable saying absolutely there was some more like propagandistic element uh meant to this. And I don't mean propaganda in such a grandiose like 20th century Soviet kind of sense, but just in the sense that implicitly or explicitly the team agreed that like, oh yeah, we hate taxation. So that like that undoubtedly that is an ideological bias that made it into the game, when in reality, if anything, there should have been a snowballing effect the other way around, where when your city grows beyond like 50,000, you should just get infinite skyrocketing demand for everything, right? Because like if your city is so hip and happening, people should be like willing to even tolerate higher taxes. Because what do you want as a business? Even in SimCity, they outline this. What do you want? You want traffic, of all kinds. You want customers for your business, right? The more a city grows, the more ideal of a business prospect it becomes to set up a business there, right? You like this number was hard coded in the wrong direction. It should be working the opposite way, where the larger a city gets, the more people, especially businesses, will be willing to stomach higher taxes because they get so much more foot traffic and there's so much more potential for people to avail themselves of various business services or whatever goods they are providing, that it would easily make up for that difference in taxes if you're purely looking at taxes as a cost, right? It's not malicious. This is the product of like 1990s and early 2000s neolib propaganda that people were indeed drinking gallons of. This is Clintonite stuff, and this policy actually ruins a lot of cities in real life. New York went through a version of this. Part of the urban decay that we've seen in the 2010s is in part due to taxes on businesses and people that have a lot of wealth and high incomes being too low. There's not enough money in the city coffers to fund essential services, nor is there the willingness to uphold the law when the owning class is the one breaking them. You know, in fact, like the worst, the funniest, but also smallest, but also like most egregious version of this is that apparently in SimCity, private schools actually help your city. Like if you plop down a private school, I've seen the Prima strategy guide. It provides some demand cap relief. Essentially, it makes demand increase for high wealth Sims, like high wealth people, to move into your city and set up shop and that sort of thing, right? In real life, this actually just worsens income inequality and contributes to the failure of cities long term. It's really funny, but it's also like, it's also perfect because you never have to build a private school either. You can only do public schools and that's fine. And also another unrealistic thing in the game is that a private school is completely free to maintain month over month. But we know in real life that's not how it works. Oftentimes, especially with the presidents of charter schools, governments often end up subsidizing those private institutions. Um, so you can ignore them. You can also, another thing that you can ignore in game is one of your advisors. You know, SimCity has various advisors where it's like, oh, here's your public safety guy who talks to you about police and fire department stuff. Here's your health and education advisor who talks to you about schools and hospitals. Here's your parks advisor who talks to you about parks and pollution and stuff, that sort of thing. You also have a traffic advisor. You never fucking listen. You're supposed to never fucking listen to the traffic advisor. Because he's always on his add one more lane shit. The only time he'll tell you, oh, we need more mass transit, is when you've already built enough mass transit to support the entire city, right? He's useless. But for that reason, you can in fact ignore him. Because the way that he's coded in game is very odd. I'm glad that the fucking network add-on mod exists because, well, actually, I don't know. This might be a feature of the vanilla game. Your traffic advisor in the game only monitors road congestion, traffic congestion. And he doesn't just do it for roads. He does do it for trains and like ferries and whatnot as well. He'll tell you like, oh, this line is overcrowded, whatever. He never makes these determinations based on actual volume usage statistics. It's only based on congestion. And there will always be points on your map highlighted in red for congestion. Those will be major intersections. That's just cities. That's just how it works. There's traffic, you know, of all kinds, you know, car traffic, foot traffic, subway traffic, whatever. That happens, right? What the important thing is the thing that he actually never once considers in his like internal game AI calculations, whatever, which is the actual volume. There's like a different color scale where the whole road will be highlighted certain colors, and the colors are like represent a percentage of the capacity used, and essentially you want that to never really, like, for the biggest roads that the most people should be using, or the biggest networks that the most people should be using, you can tolerate it maybe going up to about yellow or orange, which would be about 150 to 200% capacity, maybe, you know, try to keep it around 100 to 150% or like underneath that. For the most part, you're going to be seeing blues and greens, which is anywhere from 10 to 40 to 100% capacity used for such roads, streets, avenues, rail lines, subway lines, etc. Right? He doesn't look at that. So he will look at a side street that has 30% utilization, but there's like a small spike in volume at an intersection because that all of that usage sort of converges at an intersection, and so it creates some congestion, and he'll highlight that. What's up, 1v3? I'm talking about an in-depth critique I have of SimCity 4 that I wrote in my notes and now relaying to you guys. So your traffic advisor in the game is always on his just one more lane, bro type shit. He always looks at road congestion and not actual volume usage, and not like percentage capacity and whatever. So his function is something that you should be paying attention to the traffic in your city and whatever, to sort of design certain thoroughfares and whatnot. But you should never be listening to him. You know? But I've talked now about the propaganda parentheses negative in the game, all of the very car-centric stuff, the very neoliberal stuff. Yeah, he's like, why? It's like man discovers the concept of an intersection. That's crazy. You know, he wants everything to be a fucking Clover interchange, essentially. Anthony Tristan, welcome to the stream, and thank you for the follow. Now I want to talk about propaganda parentheses positive, and that is Keynesian social democracy. If you can believe it, this game is at the same time cringe Clintonite neoliberal propaganda and extremely based and red-pilled Keynesian social democrat propaganda. And that is because of the relationship you have to public services in SimCity 4. Every single service, every single public service in the game is just that, publicly funded, right? Roads, hospitals, and clinics, schools, police, and transit are all funded by money from the city's coffers. And again, this sort of boils down to the simplicity of the game simulation. Your simulated citizens never have to pay so much as a dime out of pocket to avail themselves of those social services, provided the city is paying for them. Clinics, schools, transit, fire services, the police, whatever, are all completely free at the point of usage. This includes water and electricity too. And presumably rent. Some of this actually gets to like a breakdown of the simulation and how much complexity a fucking video game from 2003 designed for at most machines running Windows XP could handle. But it is nice to see the recognition of the underlying principle that like, yeah, these things are pretty fucking essential to running a city. So they're owned and run by the city and like funded by the city. And that's like what you pay taxes for, right? Which makes it all the more confusing and unfortunate that the game has this weird perverse logic of the larger your city gets, the more people want to pay less in taxes. It's like, how the fuck am I going to support city services with a city of that size if all of you only want to pay fucking 3% in income taxes? Slight exaggeration. Usually they settle more for 6%. But still, one thing that is great about the tax system, there's a lot of bad stuff. There's one really good thing, right? The game works on a system of demand caps and demand cap relief, right? There's very sparing few things that you can do to raise the commercial demand in your city. That's very hard to play around. And for very inverted reasons of how things work in real life, residential demand is absurdly easy to cheese, right? Your city will always have more residential demand than like commercial and industrial demand, which can sometimes lead to problems where so many people want to live in your city, but there's like not enough jobs. Usually, as long as you have between 75 and 100% employment, you should be fine. Because apparently also, since nothing costs anything in SimCity for the residents, based luxury gay space communism, everybody just has unemployment insurance, fuck it, whatever. Parks and like green spaces and things like that, especially sports ground. The game based SimCity, the people love to play basketball and go skateboarding, right? The people love basketball. You put fucking basketball courts all around the city, the people will love you forever. And each park, there's a bunch of different kinds of parks. Each park that you place down has its own unique statistics regarding power use, water use, garbage, pollution, etc., and residential demand cap relief and desirability, right? There's internally, there's like statistics called like park aura. So essentially you have to aura farm. I'm not kidding. If you aura farm, you will have completely unlimited residential demand. Because like, this one park raises the demand cap for residential by anywhere from 250 at the lowest to something like 9,000 at the highest, again, depending on the kind of park and the size. But they all make those little green residential bars go higher. Like, yes, build more housing, right? So as long as you're putting down a healthy amount of parks, you will never, ever run out of residential demand. Which is cool. I just wish they would do a similar thing with commercial buildings. Or that they would like have the simulation be more snowbally because like, oh yeah, like obviously if the city's really big, people want to set up shop there, like literally set up shop, make a business and whatever, because there's a lot of people that will be doing commerce, engaging in trade and some such. The people also really love farmland. Especially when your city is much smaller, people want you to build farms and like low density neighborhoods. But at the same time, you can't really do anything to increase the demand cap for agriculture over time. So it is possible for your city to just run completely out of agricultural demand after it gets to a certain size, which means that like if you have a big city, you're not going to have farms in those cities. Like, no, we think Walmart's about to happen. The funny thing is that in the game, you don't build Walmarts either. There's no Walmarts in SimCity 4. They actually had to specifically, they had to include that in SimCity 2013, and they really juiced the stats for it. In SimCity, you have smaller businesses. Sometimes I have larger parking lots because of the parking thing that I mentioned. But none of them rise to the level of Walmart. By the time you get a business that deals in as large of quantities of people and goods and services as Walmart, you're getting like downtown office building kind of things, right? Like uh, retail, the game is actually very cool in that in order to build wide, you have to manually build wide. It's very easy for the game to build up. Didn't think they would actually do it. They did it in SimCity 2013, not SimCity 4. This is the strength of SimCity 4. There are no big box stores. There are mods for it, but they don't take up very much space, like the box stores themselves, which leads me to think either it's like people who just like making a city look like a town they know in America, or it's like a smaller version of that. You know, I've seen some, like the grocery store that I go to isn't as large as like a big giant fucking I don't know, Aldi or Walmart or whatever. You know, I did catch myself though when I was playing the game. I've talked about some of the limits of the simulation. Probably still not going to try to add more capitalist features to it. Yeah, it's like a lot of the propaganda and like the ideological elements of the game kind of um boil down to how it's supposed to be a simplified and approachable version of what a city could look like, you know. And so obviously your most basic conception of that is going to be influenced by the ideological climate that you're in, that you grew up in, that you work in, etc. You know, so there are a lot of good and bad things that comes the product of a product of the game just not being complicated enough to include that, you know. Like this game was fucking designed to run on Pentiums from 2002, you know, with like half a gigabyte of RAM. Um, but going back to the sort of social democratic elements of the game, there was something I was thinking about. Again, germane to the limitations of the game. I would have really liked it to I would have really liked to see it they have like a mechanic for rent assistance, rent control, or like tenant protections. There are some city ordinances in game that include like recycling programs, commuter shuttles, carpooling, reading programs, and whatnot that can boost certain statistics. They cost a little bit of money to implement, but it's like, oh, this can help reduce pollution in your city. This can help make your population more educated if you encourage people to read, you know, and things like that. I would have liked to see a couple of those regarding rent and the costs of housing and whatnot to sort of maybe reduce building abandonment over time and basically give you more padding for like if the employment situation in your city gets a little complicated and a little a little what's the term, fuzzy, kind of like muddled or whatever. I don't feel like it'd be that hard. uh you know, like I don't know. Maybe it could even just be something where it's like, oh yeah, they'll stomach higher taxes if their rent is really low, and so you fucking hit the rent control button, and now you can raise taxes higher on residential areas uh for no like demographic cost, but it like costs something out of your city's budget or something to maintain the, you know what I mean. Um, and the thing that did, like the other thing that made me think this, you know, number one was like how city services work. Number two was I noticed there's this problem. There's a quirk of the game engine where in order to build large cities, the game incentivizes you to connect your city to other cities to make larger metropolitan areas. If I go back to, well, I don't necessarily want to have to go back to the screenshot. I don't think I have to for the purposes of this. Sims will, for whatever, I guess, in service of the simulation, especially if Sims are closer to the edge of your city, they will actually look for jobs in the next city over first before they look for jobs in their own neighborhood, you know? Which led to actually something really funny that happened where like, okay, I'm going to open Paint to demonstrate this, right? I'm going to open Paint 3D because this was really funny and I need you all to see this. Um, there we go. So like I had my city, let me use black for the roads, whatever. I had my city, it was like here. It was a little bit grid. There's the train station right here. And like here, let's make this a little bit bigger, I think. Something like that. You know, I usually start my cities with kind of like basic grid patterns, so it's like easy to tell where you are. And so like there's a railroad, which I'll use red for, that like goes this way, you know? And so like imagine this is like the edge of the city. And there's also, because the next city over is also a big city, I connected with an avenue. So let's imagine this is like a bigger avenue and like this goes over here, you know, and this connects to the other city. You know, so there's some commercial areas, there's some residential areas and stuff here. And there's a query tool in the game. One of my favorite things in the games. You actually have the ability to click on a business or a house and see where all, like if you're clicking on a business, where does everybody live who works at that business? Where are they coming from? Or if, you know, if you're clicking on a house, where does everybody in that building go for work? You know, and how do they get there as well? The pedestrian color is this, right? It's this like pink purple thing, right? So for anybody commuting by walking, you get a line, an arrow in that purple pink color. What was happening in the initial stages of this new city, because there's often an imbalance between jobs and residential development in a city, is there were people who were living here. And keep in mind, these blocks are like 6 by 6. So it's like, let's see, 6 times 16. That's like 100 and some meters across. People were fucking starting here, right? It's like they live here, right? So they start there and it's like, oh yeah, I walk to work. Here's the path how I walk to work. And I mean, there was a sidewalk. Wasn't like they were fucking walking into oncoming traffic, but they were going from. It's even funnier when you can appreciate how large of a distance this is. And as well, that there's a train station right the fuck here. This is like, it's a hybrid. It's like a central transit station. You can take the bus from there. You can take the train from there. You can take the subway from there. There's a perfectly good fucking railroad going this way. And there's perfectly good bus lines that can take you to the next city. And then fucking, today I will walk several miles to the next city for my job. They weren't unemployed. They had a job. They just, fuck it, sure. SimCity might be the funniest city builder game I've ever played, or I've ever seen. Played like 2 or 3 city builders. Hilarious stuff. But it's, you know, this is germane to some of the problems that you start having because oddly enough, this is easier of a connection for Sims to make than like, here, let's make another like component grid here. Than like this. You know, not walking to the next city, just walking to like the end of the block. In fact, like then maybe like this. You know, like they live here and they work here. This is very uncommon because this development here would be at the edge of the city, right? So what Sims would want to do first, I'll use blue. Blue is the bus routes in this game, all right? So keep that in mind. I'm using blue here. What they would want to try to do is something like this, right? And look for work in the next city. But oftentimes cities can reach kind of a stable state with like an imbalance between jobs and citizens, right? There will be more, like oftentimes you run into the problem where there's more citizens than there are jobs in your city. Or sometimes there is a city where you have more jobs than residents, in which case that's great and that helps neighboring developments. The problem is sometimes Sims spend a lot of time trying to go to the next city to find jobs, and they can't find them. So they give up. Once they do this, because they've exhausted, I think, like a larger distance, it doesn't occur to them to walk down the street to look for a job if they're living right next to the edge of another city. So all along this area here, where I've just kind of scribbled in black, you get abandonment issues, right? You get not of the like emotional kind where there's a cute, vulnerable trans girl who doesn't want you to leave her. No, 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 no. Right? That can be solved with hugs, head pats, reassurance, and following through on your promises that you will look out for them, and like if they ever need you, you will help them. Right? Smiley face. No, I mean abandonment issues, in that people will actually abandon their homes and apartments in this like area of the city. It's not uncommon to see a bunch of that, right? Even when there's a lot of office buildings and industry that they could go readily work at, you know? And so that got me thinking about like, oh, well, there really should be more levers, in-game levers for you to pull to try to keep people from doing this and getting really lost and then like giving up, you know? But that's another thing that I feel like could owe in part to the limitations of the game. And ultimately, I think it's more of a benefit than a drawback. It's kind of annoying. I wish they had worked out that kind of kink in development. But, you know, the game was rushed. It's been known to happen with many video games, you know? Let me erase all that. Over here. Let's see. But yeah, and I never like usually never got abandonment really inwards into the city. It was always closer to the city's edge. Not to say it was always exactly on the edge, but it was always in an area where people would like hitch a ride on some kind of transit to go to the next city over, which tends to be more towards the edge. And that was kind of annoying. It would just be really nice to have a like, oh yeah, this is to like address unemployment. So Sims can like still live in this apartment building without like leaving and abandoning it, right? Like that would be a nice thing to have to sort of prevent that from happening, because it's really annoying when you have a well-developed city with hundreds of thousands of people, and despite the preponderance of jobs available, there's always a few apartment buildings like in the southwest corner that just get abandoned every now and again. And I have tested this. No amount of building more employment opportunities in your city actually fixes this issue. It's fundamental to the simulation of how Sims look for a job. Here in my notes, I mentioned zoning. I've already talked about zoning, the strengths and weaknesses of it. I will say, actually, I would have really liked to see mixed use zoning. It is like a little bit disappointing, despite the fact that the game is rushed. There are several buildings in the game, like there are modded buildings that can emulate the functionality of mixed use zoning. And there are buildings in game that have the functionality, the basic functionality that you would need to just implement mixed use zoning, right? Like there are buildings that have like 3 different statistics. Hospitals have separate stats for workers, doctors, and patients, right? These are 3 different types of demographies. All doctors are considered as workers, but not all the workers are doctors. The game does differentiate between those. And then obviously the patients are their own statistic. That's like, even, I think schools do the same thing where there's workers, teachers, and students. Same thing. That's even more complicated than mixed use zoning would have to be, because a like residential building like only has one statistic, it has residents, right? And then, well, I actually like they have residents and wealth, but you wouldn't have to split up that wealth statistic, you know? And then businesses have like the statistics of like how many workers. All it would take is to design it, like you could even make it a unique zone type, like, oh, mixed zoning. And it's like residential on top, commercial on the bottom. And you have stats for, oh yeah, this is how many people live here. This is how many people work here. And these are separate stats. Some people come here for work. They can work just from like within the building, but they don't always do that, right? It's part of the simulation. It becomes more of a flaw if you like for how much the game incentivizes that without actually having it, and how simple I feel like it would be to program. Though because of its like more unique nature, because it necessitates adding a new type of zoning, I think modders haven't really been able to pick up on it, with the exception of, like I said, modded buildings where it's like, oh yeah, this is a mixed use apartment building that you can select and just manually plop down like that, like you put a school down. And it's like, oh yeah, it can have up to 100 residents or like 50 residents, and it can have up to 10 jobs, on the ground floor retail or whatever. Yeah. Uh, a lot of the good and bad of this game are made possible through another limitation that I think is noteworthy to bring up. Though, given that it's equally a strength and a weakness, I don't see much reason to cast it as one or the other or discuss the ways in which it is, because I think it's so simple. You could reasonably understand the implications of that. The game does not differentiate between what kind of residence, business, or industry a type of zone is, right? The game doesn't distinguish between renters and homeowners, right? You could lump this into a Marxian critique of like the relationships to production, whatever, how it's like, oh, it's not just income, it's this other thing too. Relatively minor. But then with businesses and industry, it doesn't differentiate, despite there being flavor text, which is very fun, and the buildings themselves actually looking different. The game doesn't differentiate what kind of commercial or industrial job you have, right? Except for like, oh yeah, this is a commercial office, this is a commercial service. Within that, it doesn't distinguish, there's no like distinction of, oh, this is a grocery store, this is an accounting office, this is a law office, this is a I don't know, this is a hairdresser, this is a car dealership, whatever. It's all just commercial, right? So there's like a flattening, there's like I guess a flattening homogenization of that. But again, like the game already simulates every single person that lives in your city. I think it's pretty reasonable that they not have to simulate every single job, especially because they do already distinguish between like services and offices and like industrial and agricultural. Again, for agriculture, they don't specify whether you're cultivating food or cash crop or whatever. But I think that goes to make the game a little bit more playable, because that would just add another insane level of micromanagement to building a city. It's just one of those things that I'm willing to be pretty generous on, because again, this game came out in fucking 2003, and it does directly show you that yes, building a city only for cars is a bad city. Like it just fucking won't work. I obviously didn't read my notes verbatim. I talked for way longer than what I wrote notes on, but that's the gist of my feelings on SimCity 4, having been playing it a lot recently. And I don't intend to stop either. In fact, I would like to show people some things that I've gotten up to, if I might. Let me go to document SimCity 4 regions. There we go. Okay. Let me show y'all what I've been doing. Teller, Alaska, up to this point, has presented a unique challenge to me, building the largest metropolitan area that I possibly could, which so far I have succeeded. 2.2 million people. But I decided, hey, wouldn't it be fun to do the same thing for other regions as well? There's like the default regions in the game. Some of them are a bit smaller. They could constitute very fun projects because sometimes it does get a bit cumbersome when you're working with the largest possible cities, right? And instead of just making them as big as possible, I figured, wouldn't it also be fun to get a little bit artisanal, to explicitly design these will be the more urban areas where I build up a lot more. And then these will be the rural areas that are a little bit more spread out, where I will still try to have them be like walkable and connected by transit to the larger cities, but like would reflect a less dense urban character, right? So why am I in the documents folder? I will show you. Let's start with Timbuktu is the default region of the game. It's where all the tutorials happen. There we go. Timbuktu Regional Railroad Plan. Railroads in the transit map are represented in red. So I decided, hey, wouldn't it be cool if I just took a screenshot of each of these regions and like drew a railroad network where I would want the railroad to go for when I build a bunch of cities in this game? Because one of the things I did in Teller, Alaska, is I didn't visualize it like this beforehand. I just went into each city and was like, okay, here's how I'm going to build these railroads. And I actually built them first. This gives me the advantage of like having it kind of laid out first before I go in and build anything. So I don't have to start a city in every tile before I like know fully what I'm doing with it. So here we have a railroad network. Look at that. I drew the red squiggly lines. Give me a couple more of these. I went in with the implication that any one of these tiles where it's possible to have a ferry, I would place a ferry. In fact, for some of these tiles, I actually made a point like, okay, I'm not going to go too hog wild with the bridges, right? I'm only going to have bridges where the water's quite a bit narrower, right? Here's like the one big crossing point because that links this landmass to this landmass, right? But then this constitutes kind of like a loose plan for a transit network, where I try to connect every single tile in the region. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay. So I build a city on one of these. And then if you hop on the train, you can go to any other city in the region, right? This is the region with all the tutorials, right? But then I had the idea. This one is like a first attempt where I like didn't know whether I wanted to differentiate certain areas. Then I had the idea. If I go to Fairview, where's Fairview? Here, right? Does this have any? Some of these I already had like, yes, here we go. Okay. So some of these I already had like cities that I will have to go in and like erase. But I started actually color coding the railroads. So across all of these, red is for like urban railroad networks, and then yellow is for rural railroads that go through rural areas. And so the idea is the red squiggly lines will be a little bit more dense. There will be a little bit more connections, whereas the yellow ones will have a bit fewer in the way of connections, right? So like the central area of this region is going to be like here, right about the area where this river kind of splits off like that, right? But then these areas are going to be a little bit, these are going to be more rural, you know? So there's not going to be as much of the urban rail network going into them, you know? Ooh, I forgot to color this one red because this is still urban. Well, whatever. But you see what I'm getting at? I also did the same thing for a bunch of other regions. Let me take a look at one other one. Let's see, Berlin. London, New York. I think I did one for New York. Did it for New York. I did it for San Francisco too. Yeah, New York's only got a couple that are going to be like that I would want to be like rural railroads. Just these few tiles up here, because this cliff actually represents kind of a problem. You know, it'd be kind of hard to navigate that. I think San Francisco is a better example of a network that I really like the shape of. I messed something up here. I had to cross it out, so that's why there's that smudge of red there. But yeah, see here, like in San Francisco, I think this looks really cool. I think this has the makings of a really cool looking urban area. Because it's like, oh yeah, you have the flat areas near this near the bay, where it's like, oh yeah, you can have like right on the shore. There's like you make these as much of a city as you can, right? And then you have the railroad going all through here. But then on the other side of the mountains, it's a little bit harder to traverse. So these are going to be like the smaller towns. You know, despite this being a really big tile, it's like, oh, there's mountains and you can't exactly build on those. It's like really difficult to. Um, And again, there are a few cities here. This one, Bayland, by with the mayor being Millie, is actually like the largest city I had ever made prior to embarking on the Teller, Alaska city project. Or I think there was one project I started up before I started doing Teller, Alaska, but yeah. And the city has like 200,000 people. Which I think is actually, in retrospect, is actually like pretty impressive that I got to 200,000 with this, with just this medium tile, with not even the whole tile um, being being land. And this city's like 50,000. This one that says another city state. This one's actually a pretty good, like pretty well functioning city, I think, in some ways. Anyways, that's been my gaming life more or less. Oh, and as you can see here, this is another one where I was very sparing on the railroad bridges. See here is like, the fuck am I gonna make a railroad bridge going? Like, no, you can't do that. You can't make a railroad bridge over multiple tiles like that, you know. So the only places where you really could make a bridge are this tile here and like this tile up here, you know. Maybe these tiles and then this, right? So there's only gonna be like 3 bridges. So in the rest of these tiles, we're gonna have like I'm gonna have ferries, you know, so you could just get on a boat, go up that way, you know. So like if you lived in a city on this, like in this area here, you could take the railroad maybe to this shore and then take a ferry like that, or you could take a ferry, like get on a ferry here and go, woo, you know. It's like connecting Spain and Morocco. What? Which bridge? There are bridges that are this long. It's not. This is not as big of the gap. Like this is not like the gap between Spain and Morocco. Remember these. Each square within a tile is only like 16 meters. I think the largest tile is something like 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers. Oh yeah, the one that won't be there. Yeah, like how large is the Strait of Gibraltar? Gibraltar. AR, I misspelled it. Straight's depth between 300 and 900 meters. Yeah, but how long is it? Like, what's the distance? Minimum width, 14.2 kilometers. So no, this wouldn't even be as big as the Strait of Gibraltar, but it would be like, it's about a third the size of the Strait of Gibraltar. So like from here to over here, because you can only build bridges in a straight line. You actually can't build them in diagonal lines in this game, which is unfortunate. Another limitation of the game engine. But like here to here is like 4 and change kilometers. So about 1/3 of the minimum distance of the Strait of Gibraltar. And the Strait of Gibraltar is prone to fucking earthquakes. It's a fault line. So nobody's building a bridge there ever. Whereas San Francisco actually does have bridges that are more like this size. In fact, I think San Francisco has like quite a few bridges. Anyways, inshallah, I eventually will fill these various regions with urban and rural developments alike, all of which will be walkable or traversable by rail or bus. Thank you. I will construct the anti-car Soviet Republic of SimCity Stan. Thank you. It'll be great. And yeah, I guess that kind of concludes my uh, uh, SimCity. Also, this isn't a lake; it's a bay. Um, that kind of concludes my like SimCity misadventures. Should be a bunch of fun. Fun for me, anyways. Take a beat. SimCity is a very difficult game. There is a massive learning curve to SimCity. You guys saw how hard I was struggling. The couple times I was playing SimCity on stream, that I tried to balance the budget of my city, and I got up to like about 10,000. Um, that's actually the largest city I've ever made where I've actually balanced the budget. All the stuff that I've talked about are kind of like with balancing the budget as no object in the game, because that shit is absurdly difficult. The game already is actually very, very challenging if you just kind of have all the money in the world, which is generally how I play the game. Because it's like you're building a city from nothing. You may as well like give yourself one other liberty as well. Um, yeah. Yeah, even like, and I feel a little bit better about it because giving yourself unlimited money in SimCity is by no means a win the game cheat code. You still have to know how to build a city, and that is hard, you know? Like it took me 15 years. I think I was introduced to SimCity 4 when I was 11 years old in middle school. I was like, "Whoa, this game's really cool. You can build a city." Um and it took me 15 years to actually learn how to build and maintain a city, right? That's how steep the learning curve is. Even as recently as like last year, I didn't really have a great idea of what I was doing. So it's hard. It's probably the one of, if not the most difficult game I've played and that I continue to play. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, even donate to support the channel. It would really mean a lot to me.